Hello and welcome. I'm David Gibson, Director of the Center on Religion and Culture at Fordham University in New York, and I want to welcome you all to our webinar, Cancel Culture, Safety or Censorship, Freedom of Speech, Higher Education, and the Fate of America's Public Square. We're bringing you this webinar in collaboration with our colleagues at Fordham's Center on Community Engaged Learning. Now, our title may sound rather dramatic, but I think if you look around, it seems that cancel culture is everywhere, along with its siblings, call-out culture, and deplatforming. The delisting of several Dr. Seuss books is perhaps the latest example or outrage, depending on your point of view. That's been the storyline for several days now. J.K. Rowling, the author of the Harry Potter books, was an earlier example for her comments on transgender people. And just this week, I saw a business story describing the denial of certain types of loans as a kind of cancel culture. The debate over cancel culture has been propelled by our polarized politics and culture wars, but it really got a boost last summer when more than 150 intellectuals and artists signed an open letter at Harper's Magazine decrying a censoriousness, they called it, that they said was taking over the culture. Quote, "The free exchange of information and ideas, the lifeblood of a liberal society, is daily becoming more constricted," the letter said. And they pointed in particular to their friends on the cultural left. They cited, quote, "an intolerance of opposing views, a vogue for public shaming and ostracism, and the tendency to dissolve complex policy issues in a blinding moral certainty." Now, coming amid the protests for racial justice following the killing of George Floyd and many other instances of brutality against Black Americans, the Harper's letter fueled even more controversy. And at this point, it seems no argument is complete unless it's been brought under the umbrella of cancel culture, what's become an all-purpose epithet whose meaning may be as elusive as it is pernicious. I was struck during the recent Senate confirmation hearings for the Attorney General nominee, Merrick Garland, who's just been confirmed. And in the written questions to him after the hearing, Texas Senator Ted Cruz wrote to Merrick Garland and said, quote, "What are your thoughts on what is called cancel culture? Is cancel culture, as you understand it, consistent with the values of free speech?" And the Attorney General Garland responded, quote, "I do not have an understanding of the meaning of the term sufficient to comment." I know what he means. Well, what a Senate confirmation hearing could not clear up, we aim to clarify today. And to help us sort through it all, we're joined by three terrific panelists. First, a colleague here at Fordham, Laura Specker-Sullivan. She's an assistant professor of philosophy at Fordham and a bioethicist specializing in culture and neuroethics. We also have with us John Baskin, a founding editor at The Point magazine, and the associate director of the Creative Publishing and Critical Journalism Master's Program at the New School for Social Research. And finally, Mary McNamara, a Pulitzer Prize winning columnist and culture critic at the Los Angeles Times. Mary last year wrote a column titled, "Cancel Culture is Not the Problem. The Harper's Letter Is." I love journalists. That pretty much puts it out there, doesn't it? Thanks to you all for being here. Here's how we'll proceed today. I'm going to ask each of our panelists to take 3 or 4 minutes to give us their take on cancel culture and the state of play. And then I'll put a few questions to them as we engage in a conversation. At the same time, I encourage all of you watching now to post questions using the chat function at the bottom of the screen. I'll keep tabs on those questions and I'll pose them to our panelists at various points. There are more than 300 of us registered and online, so I'll have to synthesize as best as possible. Now to our panelists, and let's start with Laura Specker-Sullivan. Laura?
Thank you, David. So I'm going to start I'm a philosopher. And as a philosopher, I think it's helpful to try to provide some conceptual clarity to discussions of cancel culture. I'm not surprised that people have said they don't know what the meaning of the term is. Cancel culture is not any one thing. Essentially, it's an overused and imprecise term that's used to describe a variety of social phenomena, sometimes accurately and sometimes erroneously. So there are a number of variables that we might think about when we're trying to figure out what exactly we're describing with the term cancel culture. So is the target a person or not? Is it a corporation? If it's a person, are they alive and can they respond, or are they dead? Has the target been particularly influential? Have they generally escaped criticism or been given a pass in the past? Is the catalyst for the criticism a brief remark or action? Is it something more systemic or persistent? What is the goal of the critique? Is it to remove something with elevated status from a pedestal they're currently on the argument that they don't deserve it, sometimes described as revoking someone's cultural cachet? Is it re-examining something previously understood as normal within a culture? Is it decreasing something's social influence? Is it enforcing accountability for bad behavior? Is it encouraging people to boycott something? These are all different kinds of social phenomena, and I think we do a disservice when we describe them all generically as if they're all one thing. As it's been used lately, cancel culture strikes me as a straw man, which is a philosophical term for an imagined interlocutor who is constructed so as to be obviously wrong and so easily defeated, where the straw man is something like a stand-in for an imagined, generic, so-called social justice warrior who is criticizing someone or something purely on grounds of political correctness. Some people might do this on Twitter when they join in on a cancel hashtag, but in general, I think the idea of cancel culture more charitably refers to an effort to question why some people and some things are seen as normal and so immune from criticism and others are not. It also involves questions of who can criticize whom and for what reasons and on what platform. The fact that there's more social criticism right now is a sign of our changing cultural and societal norms and our sensitivity to voices that haven't always been heard, as we attempt to root out injustice in terms of cultural representation and influence. I also just want to add that I think that while cancel culture is often described in opposition to free speech, criticism is actually central to a functioning democracy. So John Stuart Mill, who is one of the staunchest philosophical defenders of free speech, said that criticism as part of debate is important because it helps individuals to gain clarity on their own reasons for actions and belief. Personally, I don't see a lot of public criticism as shutting anyone down, although it might rightly remove people from pedestals that they don't have any legitimate right to, and this can result in deplatforming their voices. If anything, and again, I'll clarify that I'm thinking about cancel culture charitably, which is something I always encourage my students to do and not constructing a straw man. I think cancel culture is part of a culture of healthy criticism and debate, and it seems to be precisely the people who are used to getting a free and easy pass to their pedestal who are so upset about the rise of public criticism. That's it for me.
Thank you, Laura. That's great. John Baskin, over to you.
Okay, thanks. I'm glad we started with a philosopher because I'm not going to do so much definition, and I'm glad actually you sort of laid out a lot of the kind of phenomena that go under the term cancel culture, because ultimately I think arguing over the term, which we love to do as intellectuals and academics, and whether it's a good term or not, can sometimes be a distraction from really addressing the underlying phenomena, which I do think are real. Maybe in a contrast to the two other panelists, I think I would say that the tactics of cancel culture have resulted in a growing sense of discomfort and anxiety for a lot of people in our current society, and not just powerful people, not just academics or intellectuals, but people throughout the society that do feel, to refer to a term that was used with the Harper's letter, a sense of greater censoriousness, a sense of hesitancy about engaging in public life because of a kind of escalation in the penalties for they feel saying the wrong thing or having the wrong kind of opinion. But I do think it's important to remember, picking up also on Laura's point about viewing this culture charitably, that for the people who employ these tactics, cancellation is not an end in itself. It's an instrument for bringing about, in their view, a happier, more inclusive, and more equal culture. And for many progressives, even if they admit that cancellation sometimes goes a little far or attaches to the wrong person, they would say that the occasional excesses are small prices to pay for bringing this new culture into being. And this is why I want to focus on the second word in cancel culture, culture. What kind of culture are these tactics creating in our society? And I think a lot of people would say it is bringing into being a more egalitarian society. And I think any serious discussion about cancel culture has to consider, therefore, not only the discomfort and anxiety that people have felt when these tactics are employed, though I think it does need to take those seriously, but also the culture's positive agenda. There are many people, in fact, they're the majority of people under 30 in my experience, almost all of my students, for instance, at the new school, who think this new culture is good and have been shaped by its values and practices. They accept the culture's judgments as valid and they believe in its mission. So then there's a question: how can we judge this culture along the lines suggested by this panel? One useful question I think we can ask is whether the new culture that is being created is actually more inclusive, safer, more equal, and happier than the one it is trying to replace or cancel, as its proponents claim it is. This is to judge it according to its own metrics of success. A second question I think we can ask is, assuming it is those things, what are the cultural values or practices that we will be sacrificing or losing touch with if we succeed in achieving this new culture? This is to judge it comparatively against other cultures, and especially the culture it is trying to supplant. These are huge questions, and there are, of course, no easy, simple answers to them. For the sake of getting this discussion going, though, I'll offer very brief and qualified answers, acknowledging that what follows is simply my opinion, informed by my experiences the past 10 years as a student, professor, magazine editor, and consumer of massive amounts of American popular culture, especially television. On number one, I think that in fact, it is a more inclusive and egalitarian culture than the one it is replacing. Yet my answer to question one is qualified because this culture is certainly not without its own cruelty or prejudices. And as with any culture, it's important not to deceive ourselves about what those are. On the second question, I personally feel that the cost of what is being sacrificed to bring this culture into being is very high, higher than its proponents often tend to acknowledge. When I ask myself what kind of art is being created by this culture, what range of conversation it allows, what kind of comedy, if any, and what kind of constraints on pluralism, i.e. any value system that does not place equality at its center, it endeavors to enforce, I'm reminded of an art and philosophy class that I took in graduate school on unhappiness. In the class, we read Plato's Republic and talked about Socrates' banishment, or cancellation, you might say, of the artists from his ideal city. My professor seemed to think the banishment of the artists was wrong, but I kept asking him to justify that judgment. After all, wasn't it true that art often made us unhappy? Why should we have unhappiness in our utopian society? Eventually, he said to me, rather sadly, well, I guess the question is, would you rather have a happy life without dreams? I'm sometimes gripped by that kind of sadness when I survey the culture that is coming into being around me. But this judgment is qualified too, because I acknowledge that my sadness is a product of my values, and my values are the product of having grown up in a different culture from this one, the very culture that this culture is trying to supplant. And if the new ascendant culture fulfills its mission and comes to dominate our cultural institutions, as I think it's on its way to doing, then it will solve the problem of my kind of sadness by creating a new generation of people who do not feel it. And perhaps the culture those people bring into being really will be happier and more harmonious than the one I grew up in. I'm not sure about that, and I have some grave doubts about it, but I can't rule it out.
Thanks very much, John Baskin. Mary McNamara, over to you.
Okay, I'm feeling kind of stupid because I didn't prepare remarks. I joined this panel because I do not know what cancel culture means anymore. I understood what it meant in the old days when it seemed to refer to internet campaigns to either cancel artists who had said something incendiary or done something terrible, and that questions of like how art should be measured against personal responsibility. Now, at this point, I have no idea what it means. I don't know what we do with the term, where it has created an environment where Kevin McCarthy can argue against voting rights legislation by randomly throwing in, oh, they're canceling Dr. Seuss, and now they're going to tell us what to say, which he just randomly did last week. It's like, I don't understand how we can say anybody's canceling Dr. Seuss when Dr. Seuss is perfectly legal to buy a Dr. Seuss book in this country. I don't understand, when people say that things have been canceled, J.K. Rowling has not been canceled. I think that it has become such a broad catch-all phrase that it's like now being used anytime somebody protests something that you don't think they should be protesting, it's cancel culture. I think that the internet has created an environment that allows a lot of people access to public speaking in a way that has never existed before. So I think that's something that we need to discuss. It's like, how much of this is an actual culture versus a technology, and is that the same thing? Because people have been protesting since the beginning of people. I mean, like, people have been saying that guy's doing something I don't want him to do since the beginning of time. It's just that now people have access to Twitter, to social media platforms that spread their message. They don't have to gather in front of the dean's office on Columbia University with their signs to protest. They can go on Twitter to do that. And I don't think that anybody here, and I don't think anybody in America, should be criticizing anyone for protesting something that they perceive as an injustice. My concern about cancel culture is that term now is being used as a distraction, so that you have people criticizing the people who are protesting something rather than looking at what they are protesting. So you have people criticizing the Dr. Seuss Enterprises for deciding not to publish 6 books that had just inarguably racist images in them, instead of looking at, well, maybe inarguably racist images should not be in children's literature. But instead we have everybody is outraged that Mr. Potato Head is now being called Potato Head. Like, that matters. I mean, it's like the actual toy has not changed in any way. And also, the toy company can call it whatever they want. I mean, that is not in any way, shape, or form censorship. Now, I know that when the Harper's letter came out and I wrote that piece, one of my problems with it was the vagueness of the letter. It's like they did not talk in specifics. They talked in, some people are being held accountable in ways that is excessive. Some people are getting fired because of things they shouldn't be fired for. It's hard when you're discussing, if you find yourself discussing something that you can't really explain, then maybe that's a problem. Maybe, you need to offer, as you do in journalism, actual examples. Are we talking about what happened at the New York Times? Are we talking about what happened to J.K. Rowling? I mean, again, it's like it has become just sort of this catch-all defense that is now increasingly being co-opted by the conservatives, who are trying to pass legislation against cancel culture, which is like, what the hell is that going to look like? So I think we, if it were up to me, if I never heard that term again, I would be happy.
Mary McNamara is going to cancel culture. That's a
Robin, what does it mean? We three of us just talked about from very different points of view that we don't even know what it means. And yet somehow it's being positioned as this very powerful force in our,
well, yeah. I mean, you get to a point, I think you made several good points, and all of you did, but it's one of these things. Can we also, it does seem like one of these terms like politically correct, which once upon a time came out, it was, about treating each other with civility, apparently. But again, it became hijacked. The term politically correct is thrown around, it seems to me, with abandon, and often by the right as kind of a cudgel. And it seems that cancel culture has moved into that category as well. On the other hand, people do feel a real sense of the censoriousness that John Baskin got to. Is there a usefulness in making distinctions between, and you raised this as well, Mary, between who is targeted? I mean, if you're a public figure, it's kind of, if you're in the public arena, if you're a politician or J.K. Rowling, it's part of the game. But if you're a private person who has 18 followers on Twitter and you say something stupid, is that different? Or let's talk about campus. On campus, is there a kind of a different rules of the game where you should be able to speak your mind or debate things openly? Laura, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about this in the context of my philosophy courses, right, where people have criticized Immanuel Kant for racist views, Aristotle for having a very hierarchical view of society. And I think there are sometimes arguments for removing these people from syllabi, because why are we teaching people who had these views to students? I'll say I continue to teach them, in part because they've been incredibly influential on Western ethical theory. And I teach them alongside their critics. And I don't tell students what to think, but I want them to be aware of the debate. I want them to be aware of the criticism and to recognize that these people are not one-dimensional. Their ideas do not exist in a vacuum. And so I do think to a certain extent, there is an obligation just as a professor to let students come to their own beliefs and ideas and to give them the tools to do that. But on a campus, I mean, professors aren't there to tell students what to think. We're there to give them the tools to think for themselves.
Do you have, Laura, and then to John, do you have a sense, what is your sense of the atmosphere on campus in your classrooms over these last few years among students? Is there a greater nervousness, anxiety, or do people feel free to speak their mind?
I would say, I mean, so the way that I teach is to encourage people to understand each other's views charitably. And I'll say I'm a bioethicist. I talk about euthanasia. I talk about abortion in class. I've had students talk about their personal experiences with both in class. And I think creating an atmosphere where people feel like they can share their thoughts and feelings without getting attacked, but knowing that someone might criticize them based on a charitable understanding is really important. And so I haven't found that students are tense, and I've found that my students are very open in talking about sometimes very personal experiences with ethically fraught decisions.
John, what is your feeling just, in the classroom and in that environment?
So yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, being a teacher, I'm really glad that I'm a teacher because I think it does help give you a sort of, it keeps you away from some of the stereotypes of the sort of cancel culture groups about like what young people are like today. There are some aspects of my class, like I mentioned in my opening remarks, my students are incredibly nice to each other. They're incredibly tolerant and sort of, well, let me qualify the word tolerant, but they're incredibly, they do a really good job of allowing for each other's different identities and experiences. and not discounting any of those in a way that I really think is better than when I was in school. There really is there really is a kind of sense of the different places people are coming from, and a better understanding of mental health, better understanding of different identities and what they bring to the table and how not to pigeonhole or stereotype them. So all those things, I really think they do come to the classroom with a sense of inclusivity and an attention to that is brought by this culture that I was trying to describe, that some people call cancel culture, but that you might call egalitarian culture, or whatever the people might want to call it. However, I do think, I don't want to be too idealistic about it. There are views that people would be very uncomfortable to voice in this classroom. And some of those views are things that I think ought to be in bounds in an academic environment. I do think, like, I did my graduate school at University of Chicago, where they still do the core, and the idea of being exposed to philosophers who have views that many of the students today may find repugnant is not only that those philosophers have shaped our world, but that they may be right. That you actually have to keep open the idea that your own views, your presentism about the supremacy of our own views today in the culture that we think is the right one could be wrong. There are very intelligent people throughout history who have had very different views. And just because we can see what might have been, racist or retrograde about those views doesn't mean that they were wrong in every respect, or that our views are superior to theirs, and that our views don't have weaknesses that will be seen by people in the future of us. And so I do think, I do feel that students have a little bit less tolerance for that than I wish they did. I think, and for someone who sort of brought into the classroom a real sense that, look, this culture that we're bringing into being may be flawed in fundamental ways, and there may be different philosophies that are just as valid, or, to put in, Fordham, the idea of religion, of religious belief, and of the religious view of the world, for instance, is one view that there's very little tolerance for in the classrooms that I've been, and that's a form of intolerance that I think, and a prejudice to some degree of the current culture that is not always thought through or included in their universe of who they think is sort of worthy of having this form of extreme tolerance or extreme egalitarian attitudes toward. So I think it's complicated.
One distinction that I think, and it comes to mind as you all are talking, is this difference between the classroom abstractions of ideas, that we're debating ideas, versus debating who people are, things that are debates over someone who's transgender, or race, issues of race, when you bring up ideas that really do make people unsafe. Donald Trump gets banned from Twitter because he's actually fomenting insurrections, or someone is saying things that create an unsafe environment or attack someone personally. You're not saying that my belief or my ideology is wrong. That that could be fair game, but yeah.
But the distinction's not that easy to uphold, as people sometimes pretend it is, between attacking ideas and attacking people's identities. I mean, if you want to have a conversation about the nature of sexuality or of gender, that's something that some people are going to take very, very personally, and as an attack on themselves, potentially, based on how they identify. And yet there are also ideas at stake. Ideas about what femininity or masculinity or gender or sexuality are. So that's just one example, but it's not always so easy to separate those two things.
Is there anything, Mary McNamara, is there anything new? This cancel culture seems to be, again, very directed, and it came up at a really inappropriate or inopportune time during the George Floyd protests and all of that, but directed at the left, the cultural left, whatever that is. But it seems to me, I cover religion as a journalist for many years, and I'm Catholic, and we did pretty well at canceling people for a long, long time. Is this something, is kind of the left or whatever you want to call it being unfairly branded with this? It doesn't seem like it's a particularly new phenomenon.
Yes, I mean, obviously, if it's like when I hear the term woke mob, which you do hear, I'm just like, who are you talking about? What mob are you talking about? I mean, the mob I saw that tried to take over the Capitol building was not in any definition woke, but there is like this sort of notion that is put out there that there are these like, you know, rampant, I mean, what Rush Limbaugh used to call the feminazis and I mean, these wild-eyed liberals that are trying to somehow destroy marriage and all of, and society as we know it. And as you said, and I have said repeatedly in multiple platforms, this is not new. I mean, this was like sort of, I became a feminist during my college experience, and, and it was very much, oh, you're so politically correct. When you were just trying to be inclusive, that was like, you're politically incorrect. Oh, you're whatever. You're actually suggesting that we should feature Black people in a piece about policing. It's like, oh, you're just being politically correct. So, I mean, these kinds of like pushbacks against progressive thought, it's just like, it's ongoing. Now, I'm not saying that, this, again, there's no, the problem with the definition is, yeah, it's terrible if which was early on in the conversation about cancel culture, if some person goes on Twitter, makes an fortunate joke and then finds themselves fired, that's a problem, obviously. That is a problem with people's understanding of social media, for one thing, which is that, you are not, as a journalist, I'm trained to know what I should and should not say in public, what is not should, but like what, professional, what is a professional thing to say in public? I think people take to social media and they don't understand that they are, basically writing an editorial in a newspaper or going on television. It is the same thing. So you cannot write anything on social media that you wouldn't be willing to say to a camera on television. I think people don't understand that. But, this kind of, the pushback against classics, the pushback against, whoever, the canon of Western literature. I mean, that's been going on for, for a long time. And I think that that is an important thing to do. And I think it's important to argue about Aristotle. It's important to argue about Thomas Jefferson. It's important to argue about, the fact that you look at a syllabus still and it's like white man, white man, white man. It's important to be able to say, where are the other where are the other voices if we're going to be talking about ideas? Because for, centuries, our very notion of ideas was defined by a very narrow group of people, the people who could write, who were allowed to write, who were allowed to publish. And I think, recognizing that, talking about that, I don't think people should be afraid to stand up for Aristotle. And I don't think that, I have not seen that kind of invective that would make somebody afraid to say, I'm a Christian or I'm a Catholic or it's if you say you're all going to hell, then, according to my faith, you're all going to hell, then people are going to have a problem with it.
Let's picking up on the religious impulse there, and a number of questions here have to do with intent when someone says things. Also, the quality of mercy. Let us say, I was just looking at the new editor of Teen Vogue, Alexis McCammon from Axios, who when she was a teenager, 10 years ago, had a tweet, a very unfortunate tweet, and apologized for it a couple of years ago. She was just named editor of Teen Vogue. Now she's getting, 20 writers at Teen Vogue, wrote a petition. Is there an issue that there should be a statute of limitations on stupidity? Should you be able to get, be given a pass after a certain point if you apologize? And also, again, came up with the Donald McNeil case in New York Times, a very big one, certainly in the journalism world. Intent. Does intent matter? Laura, let's go to you.
I mean, so I think what's difficult about your question, and I'll say I'm an ethicist who works in medicine, so I work on specific cases. I think it depends on so many other factors besides, I mean, I think intent is part of it, but I appreciated Mary making the point that, like, let's talk about specific examples and talk about what's going on in them and what is harmful, what is wrong, what is right, what we might want to avoid in the future. I mean, we often, I think part of the problem of the conversation around cancel culture is, again, we're talking about it as if it's one phenomenon that we're going to be able to talk about generically and solve as a problem. And it's not. I mean, it's just this big amorphous thing. And I think in many ways, it's often more helpful to talk about what's going on in specific cases. Otherwise, you're losing nuance and generating outrage.
John, do you have it?
Well, first of all, one thing I was reminded when you're talking about the religious aspect, Elizabeth Brunig of the New York Times had a tweet at some point that said something like, one of the problems with this new culture that's coming into being is that it believes in original sin, but not in forgiveness. And I think she's right about that in a lot of cases. Like, there is a sense of that people can be held responsible for their worst moment in perpetuity, or for something they said when they're very young. And I mean, just simply like, no, I don't think Alexi McMenamin should be held responsible for something she wrote when she was 17 on Twitter. And I don't think, but I also think, again, I'm from a different generation than the people who are now working at Teen Vogue. Teen Vogue is, I mean, you're talking about ground zero of whatever this culture is that's coming into being. The young journalists who are there, they are very much products of this newer culture that has a different standard and a different sense of mission around these issues. And it was inevitable. I mean, talk about making your bed. Like, this is the culture they are creating and that they want. And so, you know, I also just, like, I'm sensitive to the idea. I agree in some cases that it's true. It can be really vague to talk about. I was actually asked to sign the Harper's letter, and I declined, partly because of the vagueness and because I knew it would just become a culture war football that people would use to support whatever views they had. On the other hand, I'm ambivalent about it, because you can say, let's talk about examples, but it turns out that every example ends up then coming back to the general points. So you go into any specific example, like, say, the firing of the stepping down of the New York Times op-ed editor after the Tom Cotton op-ed. And you have one side who says, well, of course he deserved to be fired. He didn't even read the op-ed, and it was a horrible racist op-ed. And then you have the other side that says, I can't believe someone had to lose their job for printing an op-ed that 60% of American opinion agreed with at the time. And so then you just get back into the general issue, which is really a clash of values and a clash of what kind of culture we want to live in. And so I think it's hard. There's a kind of circle that happens when you talk about these things, where you try to drill down into a specific example, but then you often get pushed back out into the more general philosophical questions. And that makes it particularly hard to talk about.
You raise a good point that many of our questioners have been talking about, which is also the other term, censorship, which gets laid out. Maybe we should tease out a little bit of that. I mean, Josh Hawley, was kind of giving a thumbs up, to say the least, to the Capitol insurrectionist, gets his book contract with Scribner, I think it is, canceled, and all of a sudden it's censorship, that kind of thing. Do we understand what censorship is here, or is that also a term that's getting thrown around?
I mean, it's definitely also a term that's getting thrown around. I don't consider what happened to Josh Hawley to be censorship. I mean, partly because that was a very calculated move by him. He knew what he was doing. He knew who he was going to piss off, and he's probably happy about it. That they canceled his book, because then he can go. I personally have very little interest in how the right wing uses these terms. I mean, I agree that like we have to look at that, and it can be dangerous. The way they use these terms, throw these terms around, cancel, and try to use them for their own purposes. I also worry that can distract us from talking really in a self-examining way in sort of left liberal discourse about what the real potentials for overly censorious behavior, let's call it, in our own conversations is. But I agree with those who say most of the time this doesn't take the form of what we traditionally think of as censorship, i.e. the state censoring, a book. That's not what's happening right now. But there is this question, if a tech platform, for instance, can deplatform, certain views and people who hold them, is that something we should be for on the left liberal side, given our supposed commitment to a certain kind of open discourse and freedom of expression? I don't know. I find myself really conflicted about that kind of stuff.
Laura, and Mary, let's talk about big tech here for a moment, because I feel a couple of you brought it up. That is such an accelerant. If there's something new today, it's that every one of us is in this huge public square, and anybody with a tweet can say something stupid or not and get absolutely hammered. And yet when big tech, Twitter, Facebook, wherever it is, takes someone off Twitter, bars them, claims of censorship arise. Mary, what do you think about this? I mean, you're in media. What is both the responsibility for the problem and also this solution, which can be a bit too draconian, which is banning somebody from an entire site?
Well, I think, first of all, I think social media is no longer social media and has not been for a very long time. It is professional media. People use it. We use it, to promote our stories. People use it to promote causes. So this notion that it's social because some people use it to put, pictures of their kids up on it, that's a canard. It's like, so I think that it is a professional media, and so it needs to have rules like professional media. And I think that, yes, we do grapple with, the general, what I'm hearing from people is like, we're talking about intolerance. We're talking about intolerance among liberals, among conservatives, liberals, among just, intolerance is something that we deal with all the time. And how do we sort of navigate people's right to certain opinions versus when those opinions lead to oppression or harm or whatever. And I think that is what social media is finally being forced to do, that it's, hate speech is hate speech. If you're trying to raise, an army of neo-Nazis, you probably should be banned from Facebook, because you would certainly not be able to do that in other media platforms. So why would Facebook be different from that? So, again, it's like Donald Trump was removed from Twitter because he was relentlessly promoting a lie with the office of the presidency behind him, which is that the election was stolen. Talk about cancel culture. They tried to cancel the election. It's like, that's what's so, it's like you see people using this term and it just becomes, like I said, it becomes like just this really handy term for anything that you don't particularly like that is happening. So I do think what John was saying, I think we need a better, we should talk about it in a more sophisticated way. Cancel culture is very much, and I say this as a columnist, it's a grabby headline. It's a grabby, it's a cool catchphrase. We all like to do it. But now it has just lost whatever meaning it once had, which I don't think that it did. And I think we do need to look at just sort of general intolerance and what that actually is. Because somebody's speaking out and saying, white supremacy isn't such a bad thing. If you're going to be provocative like that, you are going to provoke people. So if you're going to say something like that, then you don't get to go, oh, everybody's trying to cancel me and they're being mean to me and they're suggesting I should be fired. I'm like, dude, you just said something that you knew was going to make people super mad. That's another thing that just really bothers me, especially as somebody who, I am a columnist. I'm an opinion columnist. I know when I write something that I'm going to get big reactions. I mean, I can't tell you how many people have been tried, cancel me, cancel my subscription, cancel whatever. It's like, but you're aware of it. And so you just sort of, I don't like, go on Twitter and argue with every single person who calls me a terrible name or trolls me or whatever, because it's like, I knew what the game was. I'm going to make this statement. People are going to be upset about it. They're going to say terrible things, and it's like, that's like sort of part of the conversation. So I think that there is also that. It's like people say provocative things. They put provocative things out there, and then they're outraged when people are provoked. I mean, J.K. Rowling being a perfect example. I mean, if you're going to basically say trans women aren't women, a lot of people are going to respond, that going in. So then you don't get to say, oh my God, everybody's being so mean to me. It's like you threw an incendiary bomb into the conversation. People are going to push back. So stand up for what you believe, but don't complain, don't say cancel culture.
John.
Can I just say one thing to that? I think I agree with you, Mary, that when journalists and people in the media world say provocative things, they know. But I do think it's important to acknowledge that not everyone knows. Not everyone is in this world. And one of the ways in which I think this culture affects people outside of academia and media and the intellectual world, and I hear this from my life, just people that work in normal white collar jobs or people who just sent their kids to schools, is that they don't know. And they feel that the norms are changing at an accelerating rate. And when you talk about like what's different maybe from the political correctness, I agree there are lots of continuities with that. But one of the terms I like is this sense, or two words I like are accelerate and escalation. The idea that the norms of what you can say and what the right ideas are changing at an accelerating rate, and that the costs for transgressing those norms are escalating, in terms of whether it means losing your job or a certain kind of public shame, which is just as horrible for a lot of people as losing their job. And so I do think it's important for people in media and journalism and sort of the intellectual world that although we know among ourselves exactly when something we're going to say is going to get a reaction, there are a lot of people in the sort of broader culture that feel this as a sense of anxiety because they actually don't know. They don't know the right thing to say about trans people. They don't know. Yeah.
I absolutely agree with you. And this is, to my earlier point, which is that, the use of social media has become professional media, and people need to be aware. If, it's like, if you don't know the rules, then don't go on Twitter. I mean, they had to beg me to go on Twitter because it was part of my job, because it's just like, it's so easy to get mad and just like send this tweet. You're sitting in your car. It doesn't seem like a big deal. You're just like voicing what you think is like a cheeky opinion. And then, the world falls down on you. But this has now happened enough times that if you are using social media, which is what I'm assuming you're talking about. I mean, people don't get censored for something they said in their house.
No, but they do at work or in their school board meetings. I mean, I am talking partly about social media, but I've talked to so many people who have this experience now where like something they thought was totally innocuous that they said in their office or I do think it's spread off of social media in some cases where they feel blindsided. And I'm not saying those people are, maybe they do need to be corrected. Oftentimes they have said things that are offensive, but there is a question of sort of how punitive the penalties should be for those people when they often do feel they've transgressed some line they didn't even know existed,
I mean, are you talking about somebody saying something in a school board meeting or whatever, a PTA meeting, and then their neighbors getting mad at them? I mean, that's not exactly canceling. I mean, it's like, that's sort of how we correct ourselves as a society. So I'm not, I mean, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I don't know. I mean, there have been cases where there have been school board meetings on Zoom that then go viral and get a huge amount of attention on the person. But yeah, I am even just talking about people feeling like they've been sort of publicly shamed at work for something. I mean, and just feeling a sense of anxiety about it. Sometimes they don't say anything, but they just feel this sense that I was trying to explain of a kind of anxiety and confusion. And I just think, I'm not saying that those people we need to like bend over backwards to make those people feel comfortable, but it is worth acknowledging that it's not, I think that the rules that we all know really well from being in this world all the time and being on social media every day are very vague and inchoate to a lot of people out there. And it's just worth, yeah, sometimes having a sense of tolerance for that.
The one thing I'd like to bring up is, and Mary was talking about it. I mean, seems everybody's trolling. There's so many people out there trying to be provocative, but there's also the question of truth. It's not just being offensive, but there's so many people out there saying patently false things. Sometimes it's a recent president, for example, or something else. Is there a value to canceling, for want of a better word, policing people who are putting out not just offensive, something you may think is offensive or disagree with, but something that is patently untrue, fake? Or do we debate that as well in the public square? Laura, you're the philosopher. Socrates got canceled. What do you say?
Yeah, I mean, I think the question of misinformation, we talk about it as if it's something that society in general is deciding. But what we're essentially talking about are news companies, private companies who are deciding to remove information that is not true from their sites. And I think they have every right to do that. And I think in some ways they probably have an obligation to do that if they're purporting to be a source of information for a broader public. Yeah.
Yeah, it just seems that there is, this issue of when people are putting out just blatant propaganda or something else, that sort of falls into another category. But it also seems like so much of what we're talking about are, frankly, interpersonal relationships, and as John pointed out at the top, the kind of culture that we're creating.
Yeah, I mean, so one thing I've been thinking through this conversation is, so I teach an introductory ethics class. It's often students' first exposure to ethics. One thing I have to really work at, mainly with my students who are American from the United States, is to explain to them that when philosophers are talking about ethics, they're talking about how individuals decide what the right thing to do is for them. They're not talking about judging other people. But students always want to go to the judgment. They're always like, okay, so this person is saying that this thing is bad, so now we can judge this other person this way. And it's, no, this is all about you and your agency. And so if anything, I think we have an unfortunate culture of ethical judgment in the US right now. I think that there would be a lot of benefit, and it would actually help a lot of this conversation on cancel culture if more people focused on their own ethical integrity rather than on judging others.
I wonder sometimes about the Puritan legacy of our, I go back and want to read The Crucible every other day. John.
Oh, I mean, I couldn't agree more with that. I often like to think about the distinction between moralism and morality, and the idea that there is a morality that has to do with that many of the values that people who engage in some of the tactics associated with cancel culture are standing up for are really good values, but I wish they would apply them to themselves, as rigorously as they tend to throw them around at other people. And I think that's sometimes an issue of sort of personal character that gets left out a lot of these discussions of sort of making broad statements about other people.
And that we could just got a few minutes left, and I want to sort of point a way forward, if that's even possible. What are your thoughts? What is the way forward? I want to go to each of you. I think a couple of you made a point. I mean, I don't know whether we'll ever define cancel culture or any of these terms appropriately. And I don't think it's possible, frankly, because it seems like everybody's going to use that term however they want. But just in terms of this wider cultural issue you're talking about, what really is the way forward? I think, you know, Mary, and you made points about, instead of just talking with a broad brush, you know, coming up, is it a case by case basis? Is it dealing with the person, dealing with the case? How do we move forward? How do we move out of this? How do we move through it? How do we move beyond it? What do you think, Mary?
Well, I think we need to keep talking about it. And I think we need to talk about it. I mean, one of the things, you know, when we're talking about, you know, people getting fired or things like that, one of the things that bothers me is that it seems sometimes that the institutions are much more willing to just fire somebody than actually address the situation in a nuanced, meaningful way. I mean, I think we all need to, you know, be able to discuss things in ways that are not like using terms like you're trying to cancel me. It's like, if you're disagreeing with me, that doesn't mean you're trying to cancel me. And it's like, you know, we need to listen to each other instead of like holding these lines. I mean, it's just like, I feel like we don't listen anymore. We're trying, and cancel culture is again being used to divide us. And that's another reason why I would like to never hear it again, because it's just too easy, you know, it's too easy of a shield. It's like, you know, well, that's just cancel culture. It's like, no, these are actually issues that we need to address. And so let's talk about it. Let's talk about why you feel like, you know, and to think I saw it on Mulberry Street should, you know, should still be published, even though the publisher doesn't want to publish it. Let's have that conversation instead of like, oh, the left has gone too far, or oh, the right has gone too far. Do you know what I mean? It's like, and so I think that by discussing each case, instead of trying to shove everything now onto this one rubric, is the only way we're going to, you know, get out of this. We need to talk to each other specifically and listen actively.
Yeah, maybe perhaps learn how to argue as well. I'm not a naturally confrontational person, but you know, being in a newsroom for years really taught me how to argue openly with friends, and then, you know, go out and have a beer afterwards. So, John Baskin, what are your thoughts about moving beyond this? How do we? Is there any ethics of engagement that can help this?
Yeah, I mean, I basically agree with what Mary said. I mean, I would just add that I think on the left, there can be an over worrying about, so the term, I agree, is very imprecise and often used as a kind of bludgeon or in bad faith. At the same time, I think it's really important not to deny the downsides of this culture that people are feeling in society, and not to pretend those things are insignificant or don't matter. Because I think far from actually advancing left liberal causes, this tendency sometimes in leftists and liberals actually just makes people distrust us. People don't believe the tactics associated with cancel culture are affecting their lives because of right-wing propaganda. They believe it because they see it in their workplaces and in their schools, and they feel it in our public life. And I think that we need to be sensitive to that if we want to redefine and tell them what you're feeling is not actually due to some mob of woke people. It's due to this effort to create a more equal society. And this is and we agree, sometimes it goes overboard. There are nuanced ways to talk about it, but I don't think just denying it's there, or that this is just like a conservative propaganda campaign, is necessarily an effective way of dealing with it. I think it tends to alienate people who see the evidence of these things in their own lives. So and in my magazine, the whole point of our magazine is to create dialogue between people, to actually create space for people to listen to each other from different philosophical, political, and intellectual traditions. And so that part of what Mary said is something I think is absolutely crucial, and that I think both we as people and our media in general could do a better job of providing space for.
Laura.
Yeah, I'm reminded of a study that was looking at how people engage in presidential elections and finding that on the whole, people tend to be much more engaged in politics during presidential elections, but much less engaged in elections in local communities, in part because at the presidential level, it feels like a sports event, right? So they're rooting for their side. It's very emotional. It tends to not really get into the debate of what's actually happening. I would say, I think one thing that needs to change is involvement in local communities and people actually engaging with each other as people on issues that affect them day to day, and not having opinions or feeling like they need to weigh in on these very large national topics, when really the way that we improve society, the way that we improve our relations with each other, is by investing in local communities and by developing partnerships with people that live right around the corner from us. And I think that that's one way to kind of fight some of the online, you only see the person's name in the chat and you don't actually sit down and have a cup of coffee with them and talk about their kids.
That's a wonderful point, and it's a great place to wrap up. Even though this has been a virtual conversation, I feel like I know you all, and I hope everyone else is connected. This is an example of the kind of conversation I think that hopefully we can have. I don't know if I'm optimistic, but I'm hopeful. As always, by the way, just before we started this morning, I saw a poll, cancel culture is everywhere, and a poll that said only about half of Americans said they've ever heard of it or understand what it is. So I don't know if that's a good thing, but I think we still have an opportunity to kind of shape this discourse around such an amorphous and volatile term. I want to thank you all, Mary McNamara from the Los Angeles Times, Laura Specker-Sullivan from Fordham University, John Baskin at The Point. You've been terrific panelists. It's been a terrific conversation. And we'll have this video posted to our YouTube channel in just a couple of days. So if you've missed it, or you know someone else who may want to listen to this or could profit from it, it'll be on our YouTube channel. Thank you all. I'm David Gibson, Director of the Center on Religion and Culture at Fordham University. We'll see you again soon in this space. Thanks very much.